The comforting aroma of cinnamon and baked apples filled my cozy kitchen as I took a golden brown pie out of the oven. This was my son's favorite treat, a tradition I've upheld every year without fail. But before I could even place it on the counter, my phone chimed with a new alert. I instinctively tapped the screen, and in those 20 seconds, my entire world shifted on its axis. A voice message started to play automatically. It was Michael's voice, my son's voice, but it was harsh, weary, and filled with an edge of disdain I'd never heard before. I can't stand this worthless old woman anymore. Once she finally takes her last breath, Leah and I will be celebrating in London with all that cash. The pie nearly slipped from my grasp. My own son, speaking about me, about my death, as if it were a bill long overdue. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my ears, replaying the message over and over, just to confirm I hadn't misheard. But there was no mistake. He meant me. He had sent the message to me by accident. For 30 years of my marriage, my late husband Arthur and I built a home founded on mutual trust. I believed that trust had continued into my widowhood. But in that moment, with the pie cooling on the counter and a searing sense of betrayal in my chest, I knew Arthur's quiet warnings had been right all along. My name is Charlotte Hayes. I'm 68 years old, a retired school counselor, and I live alone in the same house where Arthur and I raised our children. For the most part, my life has been calm and consistent. Arthur planted lilies every spring along the garden path, and I still tend to them just the way he liked. The house itself is a repository of our history. Every photograph and every creaking floorboard a testament to the years we shared. I believe that being a widow would mean quiet days, a gentler pace, and perhaps even a chance to pursue new hobbies. Instead, I uncovered a much darker reality. The treachery wasn't coming from strangers or acquaintances, but from the people I thought I could depend on the most, my own son and his wife. This wasn't simply about money. If it were, I might have rationalized it as desperation or poor judgment. What I heard in Michael's voice was cold calculation, impatience, and a casual cruelty that sent a chill through me. He wasn't just waiting for an inheritance. He was actively waiting for me to be gone. That was the very moment I grasped the full extent of the situation. This wasn't merely about my finances or possessions. It was about my personal dignity, my security, and my right to live without fear in the home Arthur and I had built together. Looking back, I realized the warning signals had been present all along. Initially, they were easy to disregard. Michael began missing my calls. He would cancel visits at the last moment, often with vague excuses about work commitments. Leah, always overly sweet, started steering every discussion toward my living arrangements. "This place must feel so immense for you," she would comment, her eyes moving around the furniture as if she were mentally cataloging items for a future estate sale. Then came the leaflets. Glossy brochures would appear on my coffee table with titles like Whispering Pines Retirement Village and Oakwood Estates. Each one showcased smiling, gray-haired couples painting or doing yoga in bright communal spaces. "You'd make so many new friends," Leah insisted. Michael would agree, emphasizing the perks like housekeeping and scheduled transportation. They labeled it independence, but I perceived a different emotion in their voices, a sense of urgency. The pressure intensified. One Sunday afternoon, they showed up with a folder of financial documents. Michael proposed I meet with his associate, a financial planner. "Mom, you don't want to outlive your resources," he said, as if I had never managed a budget in my life. What hurt the most was his tone, a mix of pity and impatience. It wasn't genuine concern, it was a form of reconnaissance. They were sizing me up, testing me, searching for vulnerabilities. At the time, I brushed it off. But after hearing that voicemail, every memory replayed in my mind with a startling new clarity. They hadn't been checking on me, they had been circling me like predators. The recollection of Arthur's final months flooded back to me that evening. He had always been the cautious one, the unwavering presence in every storm. Even as his illness sapped his strength, his mind remained sharp. Lying in his hospital bed, he squeezed my hand and said, "Charlotte, people change when money is involved, even family. Promise me you'll be prepared if that day ever comes." At the time, I thought he was being overly protective. Children love us," I told him. "They would never see me as anything but their mother." But Arthur's eyes held a solemnity I couldn't ignore. He had worked for many years and had witnessed too many families torn apart over inheritances and possessions. So he took measures. He held meetings with his trusted friend, attorney Douglas Reed. He created folders with sealed envelopes marked "for Charlotte's eyes only." These were instructions that seemed pointless back then, almost paranoid, but I promised Arthur I would follow them if the need ever arose. Now, standing in the stillness of our kitchen with Michael's voice echoing in my ears, I finally understood. The day Arthur had warned me about had arrived. I sat at the kitchen table, the pie untouched, and my phone feeling heavy in my hand. My fingers hesitated for just a second before I dialed the number Arthur had made me commit to memory. Douglas Reed answered on the second ring, his voice as calm and steady as ever. "Charlotte, is everything all right?" "Douglas," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Do you recall the backup plan Arthur asked you to create?" There was a pause on the other end. "Are you saying it's time?" "It's time." Douglas didn't ask for details. He didn't press me to explain what had happened. Instead, his tone shifted into the deliberate rhythm of a person who had practiced this exact scenario for years. "Then I'll start making the calls tonight. By morning, the documents will be activated. Every protection Arthur requested will be legally in place." When I ended the call, a strange sense of composure settled over me. My hands were firm again. Michael and Leah believed they were dealing with a naive widow, still consumed by sorrow. What they would find instead was a woman fortified with a strategy designed by a husband who knew her better than anyone else. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of day Arthur would have spent pruning his lilies. At exactly 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Michael and Leah were standing there, their smiles looking carefully arranged. Michael hugged me in a stiff, practiced embrace. Leah held out a bouquet of daisies. I had been allergic to daisies for 20 years, but I thanked her anyway. Some conflicts could wait. Come in," I said, directing them toward the living room. I poured coffee and set out cups. Their eyes scanned the room, assessing and evaluating. Leah's gaze lingered on my grandmother's porcelain cabinet. Michael examined the photographs on the mantel as if he were already deciding which ones to keep. After a few moments of idle chatter, Michael leaned forward. "Mom, Leah and I have been thinking about your situation here." "My situation?" He exchanged a look with her before continuing. "This house is simply too much for one person. You shouldn't have to worry about repairs or trips to the store. You deserve to relax." Leah pulled a glossy brochure from her tote bag and spread it across the coffee table. "Just look at this one, Millbrook Estates. It has restaurants, a golf course, even transportation. You'd never have to lift a finger." I scanned the page, noting the monthly fee of $8,000. "That seems quite expensive." "That's the beauty of it," Leah said brightly. "You would sell this house and the proceeds would completely cover years of living there, totally worry-free." And there it was, the phrase that laid everything bare. I set my coffee cup down with deliberate care. "Michael," I began, "before we go any further, I have something I think you should hear." I tapped my phone and the living room was filled with his own voice, sharp and impatient. "I can't stand this worthless old woman anymore. Once she finally takes her last breath, Leah and I will be celebrating in London with all that cash." The color drained from his face. Leah's gasp was immediate, her hand flying to her mouth. Michael stuttered, "Mom, that was taken out of context. I was frustrated. I didn't mean." "Frustrated?"
I repeated, my tone even. You were speaking about my death as if it were long overdue. Leah's voice trembled. Charlotte, it was a private conversation. He's just been stressed, worried about you living alone. Worried. I raised an eyebrow and held up my phone again. A screenshot of Leah's Instagram page glowed on the screen. The caption read, Romantic London getaway finally booked. Can't wait. The date was 3 days earlier. Leah's face turned pale. That post was for our anniversary next year, she stammered. Your anniversary is in March. This says September, next month. A heavy silence fell across the room. The performance was over, and the truth had nowhere left to hide. Before either of them could regain their composure, my phone rang on cue. I answered it on speaker. Hello, this is Charlotte Hayes. Mrs. Hayes, this is Douglas Reed. I'm calling to confirm that all documents we discussed have been officially filed with the court as of this morning. Everything Arthur put in place is now legally binding. Thank you, Douglas, I said, making sure my voice carried across the room. I'm so relieved to know Arthur's protection plan is active. The words hung in the air like a hammer strike. Michael's jaw clenched. Protection plan? What does that mean? It means, I replied calmly, that if either of my children attempts to manipulate, coerce, or pressure me into decisions about my financials, living situation, or medical care, every dollar of my estate bypasses you and goes directly to charity. Arthur arranged for this long before you ever brought your brochures. Leah gripped her purse until her knuckles were white. Michael looked as if he had been slapped. For the first time, their rehearsed sympathy vanished, replaced by sheer panic. They had arrived expecting a weak, grieving widow. Instead, they found a woman 3 steps ahead, supported by the man they believed was gone for good.
That same evening, the phone rang again. This time it was my daughter, Sarah. Her voice had a softness that might have fooled me once. Hi, Mom. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Sarah, I answered carefully. Actually, your brother came by this morning. Oh, she said, a little too quickly. He didn't mention that when we spoke yesterday. So they were coordinating. I took a breath. Tell me something, Sarah. Have you and Michael been discussing my living situation? There was a pause. Then her tone became more measured. We're just concerned about you, Mom. Being alone in that big house, handling everything by yourself, it's a lot. There it was again. The same lines, the same words Michael had used, now coming from Sarah. I see, I said slowly, and I suppose you have some ideas about what I should do. Well, she hesitated. There are communities where you'd have support and still maintain your independence. Independence. They used that word like a promise, but I heard the truth behind it. What they truly wanted was control. The following morning, I walked up the well-worn staircase to Douglas Reed Law Office. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, but the air inside felt heavy. Douglas greeted me with a hug, then led me into his private office. On his desk sat a thick folder marked Hayes Family Trust, Confidential. Charlotte, he said gently, Arthur asked me to hold on to certain information until the day I believed you needed it. After yesterday, I think that day has arrived. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs, credit card statements, and mortgage documents. Arthur hired a private investigator during his final months. He was worried about Michael's spending and Sarah's sense of entitlement. These records confirm his suspicions. Michael and Leah are drowning in debt, over $200,000. They've refinanced their home twice and borrowed against his retirement. Sarah and her husband David aren't much better. They're carrying $150,000 in loans, trying to maintain a lifestyle far beyond their means. I stared at the numbers, my stomach tightening. Douglas placed another document in front of me. My breath caught. A life insurance policy, recently filed, $2 million. Beneficiary, Michael Hayes. A clause doubling the payout in the event of accidental death. The room seemed to tilt. He took out a policy on me? Douglas's expression was grim.
Sarah was present when he applied. Arthur suspected this might happen. That's why he left you more than protection. He left you resources your children never knew existed. 2 days later, I arranged to meet everyone at Douglas's office. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and old books. Michael and Leah sat on one side of the long table, Sarah and David on the other. Their eyes darted between Douglas and me, searching for any clue. Douglas opened the first folder and slid it across the table. Michael, would you care to explain why you took out a $2 million life insurance policy on your mother? The silence was sharp. Leah's face drained of color. Sarah's jaw dropped. Michael stammered, it's not what it looks like. It looks like you were betting on my death. And with the accidental death clause, it looks like you were planning to hasten it. Sarah's eyes flickered. You knew about this? I asked her. She said nothing, but her silence was its own answer. Douglas placed another folder on the table. Inside were summaries of accounts Arthur had built in secret. Your father made sure your mother would never be dependent on anyone. Charlotte controls more than $3 million in assets you didn't know about. David leaned forward. Then what happens to it? Nothing happens to it, I said, my voice steady. It remains mine to use however I see fit. Michael's face twisted. We're your children. We have rights. You have exactly what you've earned. And after everything I've heard and seen, that amounts to nothing. Leah stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. This is insane. No, I said, rising to my feet. This is clarity. For the next 5 years, if any of you contact me about money, inheritance, or my living situation, everything goes to charity. If your love is genuine, it can wait. If not, then I finally know where I stand. The room fell into a silence thicker than stone. For the first time in months, I felt taller than my grief.
Weeks passed, and the silence in my house no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like peace. For the first time since Arthur's death, I began to construct a life that belonged solely to me. I enrolled in an Italian cooking class at the community center, laughing as I fumbled through my first attempt at making pasta from scratch. I booked a long-postponed trip to Ireland, a dream Arthur and I had once shared. I began volunteering twice a week at the local animal rescue, where a shy golden retriever named Buddy, ironic considering my allergy, learned to trust again with me by his side. The phone stayed quiet. There were no more check-ins laced with hidden agendas, no more casual questions about my investments, no more thinly veiled pressure to leave my home. I slept soundly through the night without waking up worrying about what new scheme might appear next. Each morning, I brewed my coffee and stepped into Arthur's lily garden. The blooms were steady, patient, and untouched by human greed. Standing there, I realized something simple but profound. Survival was no longer my main objective. Living fully, joyfully, on my own terms, that was my new beginning. Just when I began to believe the storm had passed, Caleb Jensen, the private investigator Arthur had hired, called me with a voice edged in warning. Mrs. Hayes, I think you should see something. An hour later, he sat at my kitchen table with his laptop open. On the screen were screenshots of text messages between Michael and Leah, copied from a cloud backup Caleb had been monitoring. The first one froze me. From Leah, she's been gone for 3 months. Maybe it's time to try a different strategy. Michael's reply, I don't think she's coming back from this, but Thomas thinks we should wait. Then another message appeared from Leah. What if we were wrong about the insurance? What if there's another way? Michael's reply. The investigator she hired is probably expensive. Maybe if we make her feel threatened, she'll come back to us for protection. My stomach tightened as Caleb clicked to the final exchange. Michael wrote, if emotional manipulation doesn't work, we might have to get creative. Thomas found out about Mom's real net worth. It's enough to solve everyone's problems permanently. Leah answered, what kind of creative? His reply was simple and chilling.
The kind where accidents happen to people who travel alone. I closed the laptop. Their betrayal was no longer just a suspicion. It was a plan. Before I could even decide my next step, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Sarah and David standing on my porch, smiling too brightly. Caleb's hand moved immediately to his phone. "They're here," I whispered. He spoke quickly into the receiver. "This is Jensen. We need backup now." I opened the door just enough to meet their eyes. "Mom," Sarah said sweetly, "we were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by." Before I could reply, David added, "It's not about money, just family." They stepped past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Caleb rose from his chair, folding his laptop closed. David's gaze lingered on him. "And who might you be?" Caleb's voice was calm. "A friend."
David smirked, but there was tension in his jaw. Sarah wandered to the mantelpiece, picking up photos from my cooking class. "You look so happy, Mom. That trip to Italy must have been good for you." My skin prickled. "I haven't been to Italy yet," I said flatly. She recovered quickly. "Oh, I meant the cooking class." The mask slipped further when David's tone hardened. "You've been traveling alone. That can be dangerous." His words were not a sign of concern. They were a direct warning. Before I could respond, the faint sound of sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flashed against the window panes. Caleb exhaled slowly, relief crossing his face. "Actually," he said, "Mrs. Hayes isn't telling you anything. She's pressing charges." David's smirk collapsed as two uniformed officers stepped into the doorway. The officers took control quickly, documenting Sarah and David's protests and gathering Caleb's file as evidence. Within minutes, the house that had once echoed with whispered plots felt safe again. I stood by Arthur's lilies as they led my children and their spouses away, my heart heavy, yet strangely light. Weeks passed. Legal proceedings moved forward, but I chose not to follow every detail. Courtrooms and charges would handle what needed to be handled. My focus was elsewhere. I booked my trip to Ireland, continued my cooking classes, and filled my days with laughter at the animal shelter. My phone remained quiet, and for the first time in years, I was grateful for the silence. One afternoon in Galway, I sat in a small cafe writing postcards to my neighbor Helen about the green hills and the salty sea air. My phone buzzed with a message from Michael, sent from prison. "Mom, I'm sorry. Please forgive me." I stared at it for a long moment, then pressed delete. Some bridges are not meant to be rebuilt. Some are meant to burn, leaving behind just enough light for you to see your path clearly. Looking back, I understand now that Arthur was right. People change when money enters the room. The same faces that once smiled with love can harden into masks of calculation. What saved me was not suspicion, but preparation and the courage to act when the truth finally revealed itself. If there is anything I hope you take from my story, it is this. Concern without consent is not care. It is control. Documentation is not paranoia. It is protection. And boundaries are not cruelty. They are a love letter to your future self. So if someone in your life tries to rush your decisions, if they pressure you to sign papers or sell property before you're ready, pause. Urgency is a tactic, not a necessity. Keep copies of your documents. Know who your true allies are, and never let loneliness trick you into surrendering your independence. Build a community with people who love you for who you are, not for what you own. I chose freedom over fear. I chose peace over manipulation. And today, as I sip tea in a quiet kitchen filled with lilies, I know I chose correctly.